When my third package in 2 weeks vanished from my porch, I had a feeling it wasn't just bad luck. But it wasn't until I caught sight of a familiar platinum blonde bob and a floral cardigan scurrying across my yard that the pieces clicked together. My name's Nolan Rivers. I'm a 38-year-old single dad, work from home as an insurance adjuster, and I've lived in Alderwood Creek for 5 years. It's a decent neighborhood, quiet, mostly, but ever since the HOA board got taken over by Eleanor Penwick, it's been less community and more dictatorship. Eleanor is your typical HOA Karen, always holding a clipboard, always squinting at your lawn like it personally offended her, and always talking about standards that somehow never apply to her own house. She's HOA president, self-appointed enforcer of neighborhood decorum, and a woman who once fined my neighbor for having excessively cheerful holiday lights. So when my packages started disappearing, I wasn't thinking porch pirates. I was thinking Penwick. It started with a missing box of running shoes, then some books I ordered for my son, Wesley, then a replacement charger for my laptop, all marked as delivered, all gone within an hour. I brought it up at the monthly HOA meeting in the community center. 3 packages in 2 weeks, I said, holding up the printouts, from 3 different companies, all marked delivered, all missing. Eleanor Penwick adjusted her oversized pearl necklace and gave me that passive-aggressive smile she used when she was about to say something condescending. "Mr. Rivers," she said in that syrupy tone, "perhaps you should consider using a P.O. box, or maybe your porch simply isn't secure enough. It's not the HOA's fault if you don't install a camera like responsible homeowners do." There were a few chuckles. Of course, the board, practically all her friends, nodded along like bobbleheads. "I'll take that advice," I said. "Thanks." What I didn't say was that I'd already ordered a Ring doorbell camera that morning. 2 days later it arrived. I installed it that night and angled it perfectly to cover the porch, walkway, and street. The very next afternoon, I got the footage I didn't know I was hoping for but definitely expected. It was Eleanor. She walked up my driveway like she owned the place, glanced around, and spotted the Amazon box tucked behind the porch chair. She looked right into the lens of the doorbell cam, not that she noticed it, and snatched the package like she was picking up her dry cleaning. Then she turned and strutted back across the street to her McMansion of a house. I stood in my foyer watching the footage, jaw clenched, heart pumping. I wasn't just angry. I was ready. She'd crossed the line, and I finally had proof, and I knew exactly how to use it. I watched the footage again, slowing it down frame by frame, not because I needed to. I had already seen what I needed, but because I wanted to be absolutely sure. Her face was clearly visible. Her embroidered cardigan, her oversized sunglasses, and even the bulky faux leather tote she always carried to meetings. There was no mistaking it. Eleanor Penwick, president of the Alderwood Creek HOA, had walked up my driveway and stolen my package like it was part of her morning routine. I walked into the kitchen and opened the drawer with the file folders. I pulled out the manila envelope where I kept neighborhood correspondence, HOA notices, and the petty citations they'd mailed over the years. I added a thumb drive with the video to it, labeled it Exhibit A, and slid it into the folder. Then I picked up my phone and called Officer Linwood. He and I had crossed paths last year when my neighbor's outdoor wiring was sabotaged. He was fair, sharp, and, thankfully, didn't worship the HOA like some of the other officers in town. When he answered, I got straight to the point. "Hey Linwood, it's Nolan Rivers. I've got clear video evidence of someone stealing a package off my porch. And I know exactly who it is." He didn't waste time. "You home?" "Yeah, be there in 20. True to his word, by the time I'd made coffee and printed out the delivery confirmation emails, Linwood's cruiser rolled up to the curb. He stepped out, adjusted his belt, and gave a low whistle as I played the video for him. "Is that who I think it is?" "Sure is." He leaned in, watching Eleanor glide off with the box like she was returning a borrowed casserole dish. "Any idea what was in the package?" "Yeah." It was a custom insulin cooler for my son's field trips. He's diabetic. Linwood's jaw clenched. That's felony theft, Nolan. Medical equipment intended for a minor. That's not just porch piracy. That's criminal negligence if it caused harm. I handed him the printouts, the footage on a flash drive, and a copy of the HOA's own bylaws highlighted where it stated board members had no jurisdiction over residents' mail or deliveries. He tucked everything into a folder. I'll file the report. You'll get a case number by this evening. Don't post anything public just yet. Let me run this through properly. I nodded. I'll wait. But if she tries to retaliate, document everything. That night I got the email, case 76421B, theft of delivered goods suspect identified. I didn't have to wait long to see the fallout. By mid-morning the next day, a patrol car was parked in front of Eleanor's house. I pretended to water the rose bushes as Linwood and another officer rang her bell. She answered in a lavender housecoat, clearly unprepared for the visit. There was no yelling, no handcuffs, just a long conversation, a clipboard, and a signature. She was served a citation, not just a warning. A formal criminal charge for theft under the state's mail protection laws. Depending on the judge and the value of the contents, she could be facing a misdemeanor or worse. But Eleanor wasn't the type to admit fault. That same evening, I got a letter slid under my door. No postage, no envelope. Inside was a single sheet with the HOA letterhead and a typed notice. Dear Mr. Rivers, due to unauthorized surveillance facing public walkways and neighboring properties, you are in violation of Alderwood Creek Covenant 8.3b. Please remove the Ring camera within 72 hours to avoid further action. I didn't even bother getting angry. I just scanned it and added it to the folder. The next morning, I headed straight to the city's zoning office. I asked for a copy of the municipal guidelines for home surveillance systems. The clerk, an older man with thick glasses and a cheerful demeanor, handed me a pamphlet. Perfectly legal, he confirmed, tapping the section with a finger. As long as the camera is on your property and doesn't record audio without consent, you're golden. I thanked him and dropped by the police station on the way home. Linwood was at his desk, reviewing body cam footage. She already tried to hit you with a citation, he asked when I handed him the HOA notice. She's doubling down, he chuckled. That's tampering. She's trying to intimidate a witness in an active investigation. I'll forward this to the DA's office. By the weekend, word had gotten out, fast. Neighbors started whispering. A few even approached me during my afternoon walk with Wes. Hey, one of them, Angela, from 3 doors down, said, is it true Eleanor got cited for stealing your insulin pack? I didn't confirm or deny. I just said, let's just say the camera works. Angela pursed her lips. You know, I always thought she was a little too involved in everyone's business, but this is something else. The next HOA meeting was unlike any I'd ever attended. Eleanor showed up late, sunglasses on indoors, lips pressed into a tight line. The room was packed, more people than usual. Even Harold, who never came to meetings unless there was a bake sale, was seated in the back with a notepad. When Eleanor tried to start the agenda, a voice cut through the room. Before we get into tree trimming policies, I think we'd all like to hear about the theft charge. Heads turned. It was David, a retired firefighter who rarely spoke unless someone parked too close to his driveway. Eleanor froze for a moment, then she cleared her throat. That matter is under review but it's on public record, right? David pressed. Theft of a medical item addressed to a child. That's serious. I have legal counsel. Do they know you're using HOA resources to serve fake citations? I asked, holding up a copy of the letter. The room erupted. People weren't angry just because she stole a package. They were angry because she'd wielded her position like a weapon. Fining people for things she did worse. Targeting residents who questioned her, using vague bylaws to bully and silence. I motioned to suspend Eleanor Penwick from the board pending the outcome of the investigation, said Angela, standing up. I second it, said another voice. It passed with a majority vote. Eleanor couldn't even protest by the HOA's own rules. A motion passed by 2/3 of attending members overrules the board. She gathered her things in silence and walked out. The next week, a formal letter from the city prosecutor confirmed that the charge had been accepted. She'd been served with a court date. If convicted, it would stay on her record for 5 years. 2 days later, a moving truck pulled into her driveway. By Friday, she was gone. Her house listed for sale by an out-of-town agent. No goodbye, no statement in her place. The neighborhood held a barbecue. People brought dishes, lawn chairs, even a fold-out screen where we projected a movie for the kids. Someone handed me a slice of pie and said, "You know, Nolan, you didn't just catch a thief. You saved this neighborhood from a tyrant." I didn't need the recognition. Just knowing Wes could get his mail safely was enough. But I'll admit, watching the new HOA interim president install a bulletin board labeled Community Suggestions felt like a victory, and the ring cam, still up, still legal. And now, no one dares come near my porch uninvited. The Monday after Eleanor vanished from Alderwood Creek like a ghost with a guilty conscience, I got a knock on my door, not a casual neighborly one, but the kind that made you pause mid-coffee and listen. 3 sharp raps. Firm, purposeful. I opened the door to find a woman in a tailored navy blazer and a badge clipped to her belt. Her short, coiled hair framed a face that didn't offer pleasantries. She showed me her ID. "Detective Marla Voss, County Fraud and Public Integrity Unit. Are you Nolan Rivers?" I nodded, instantly alert. "I'd like to ask you a few questions about the former HOA president, Eleanor Penwick. May I come in?" I stepped aside and shut the door behind her. She took a seat at the kitchen bar, opened a leather-bound notepad, and flipped to a page already scribbled with dates and addresses. "Your name came up in an ongoing investigation into misuse of HOA funds. I understand you filed a theft report involving Miss Penwick." I leaned on the counter, arms crossed. "Yeah, I submitted video evidence. She was charged." She tapped her pen against the page. "That's what got our attention." It pushed an open inquiry into something actionable. We've had suspicions about Alderwood Creek's HOA for over a year. Anonymous tips, financial irregularities, but nothing concrete, until now. I sat down slowly. "You're saying this goes beyond her porch piracy?" She looked up. "Far beyond." Then she showed me a copy of the HOA's financial ledger, or what was supposed to be one. It was a spreadsheet printout marked Q1 Q4 operating budget with a column of expense categories that made no sense. Decorative consultation, executive retreat strategy alignment, security assessment fee. "None of these are standard HOA expenses," she said. "And we can't find any service providers linked to the payments." The checks were signed by Penwick and one other board member, Ronald Tellum. "That name ring any bells?" I nodded. "He's the guy who always wore the Bluetooth earpiece and never made eye contact." "He was treasurer. Still is, technically, but he's not answering his phone or the door. We have a subpoena in progress." I stood, walked to the cabinet, and pulled out the folder I'd kept adding to. "I've got every HOA notice I ever received, including a fine that never got processed through the usual mailing system. It was hand-delivered. No audit trail." She took the papers and scanned them quickly. "This is gold. We're investigating possible embezzlement, mail fraud, and unlawful use of authority. If we can show she used her position to issue fake penalties and redirect funds, we can bring federal charges." I leaned back. "You think she was laundering money through the HOA? That's one possibility. But right now, we're focused on proving that members of the board knowingly fabricated fines and used that money for personal expenses." That night, I received a call from Kayla Simmons, a neighbor who had recently moved in from out of state. She kept to herself mostly, but apparently she'd been quietly collecting her own folder of HOA harassment. "They made me pay a new resident processing fee after I moved in. $400. I asked for a receipt, and they said it was digitally processed. But the payment page was a broken link. "Do you still have the email?" "Sure do," with attachments. She forwarded it, and I passed it along to Detective Voss. The next day, she brought a forensic accountant with her to my house. He was a quiet, bespectacled man named Tarek who barely spoke, but had a way of highlighting entire columns on documents like he was scanning for lies. By the end of the week, they had compiled enough to present to the county prosecutor. That Saturday, multiple unmarked vehicles rolled into the neighborhood at dawn. I watched from my upstairs window as two officers knocked on Ronald Tellem's door. When he didn't answer, they produced a warrant and entered. He was led out in cargo shorts and sandals, visibly shaking. A few hours later, they hit Eleanor's former house, now under contract. They didn't need her to be present, they were after her office inside. They carried out 3 computer towers, multiple boxes of documents, and a locked metal drawer labeled Board Archive 2020-2023. Later that afternoon, Detective Voss called again. "We found something you need to see." She met me at the community center, where they had taken over the small meeting room the board used to use for its closed-door executive sessions. On the table was a binder labeled Resident Compliance Reports. Inside were detailed logs, photos, notes. Even transcripts. She was monitoring certain residents, Voss explained. Anyone who questioned board decisions, filed complaints, or didn't comply quickly. She kept behavioral files. You, Kayla Simmons, the family at 12 Sycamore Lane, and 5 others. I flipped the page. My name, my house. A photo of my backyard from an angle that suggested it was taken from behind my fence. She was surveilling us. In at least 3 cases, yes, including yours. In one instance, she even applied for a special neighborhood grant using photos of your landscaping, claiming it was part of a community beautification project. I stared at the page. That's my garden. I paid for those upgrades myself. She pocketed the grant money. By the end of the month, criminal charges were filed. Eleanor was formally indicted for embezzlement, wire fraud, and unlawful surveillance. Ronald was charged as an accessory to fraud and obstruction of justice. The prosecutor held a press conference on the courthouse steps, flanked by Detective Voss and several members of the community, including me and Kayla. The media ran with it. HOA president indicted in major suburban fraud case, followed by a segment on local news featuring clips of Eleanor's house being raided. The fallout was swift. The Alderwood Creek HOA was stripped of its authority by a temporary injunction. A state-appointed receiver was brought in to audit the books and oversee a full reform. All fees issued over the last 3 years were frozen, and residents who had paid fines under Eleanor's rule were notified to prepare for reimbursement. Kayla and I helped organize a legal aid night, where affected residents could bring their documents and get free consultations from a team of volunteer paralegals and retired attorneys. It turned into more than just paperwork. People showed up to share stories, swap timelines, and piece together the broader picture of how deep the corruption had gone. One couple discovered they had been charged a roof inspection fee for work that was never performed. Another neighbor, a daycare owner, had been fined for alleged zoning violations that didn't exist. The community, once splintered by silent resentment and fear of retaliation, began to connect in ways it never had before. We formed a new committee, not a board, not an HOA, but a resident-led oversight group designed to make sure no one ever got that kind of power again. At our first meeting, Kayla stood up and said what I think we were all feeling. They tried to turn this neighborhood into a fiefdom. But all it took was one camera, one stolen package, and one guy who didn't back down to crack it wide open. And that's the part that stuck with me, because I hadn't gone looking for a fight. I just wanted my packages to stop disappearing. But sometimes, when you shine a light on the right moment, the shadows behind it can't hide. And as for that Ring cam still mounted. But now, it's not just watching the porch, it's watching a neighborhood that finally started watching out for each other. The first Alderwood Creek Community Oversight meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening inside the old daycare building next to the park neutral ground. No one wanted to use the old HOA office anymore. Too many bad memories, too many quiet grudges. I arrived 10 minutes early, but the parking lot was already halfway full. A long, folding table had been set up with clipboards, sign-up sheets, and fresh pens still in their wrappers. Kayla was setting out a stack of neighborhood maps. There were already 15 chairs lined up, and people were bringing more from their trunks. "Didn't expect this many," I said, helping her unfold another metal chair. "Neither did I," Kayla replied, gesturing to the growing crowd. "And not just from our street. I saw a couple from Birch Hollow and another from Carroll Heights. Word's gotten out. We didn't have to call the meeting to order. People settled themselves and turned toward us like they were waiting for a fire drill to start. No gavel, no podium. Just concerned people ready to make sure what happened under Eleanor's rule never happened again." A tall woman with an arm tattoo of a hawk raised her hand. "I'm Jasmine. I just moved in last month, but I found out I was billed for 2 years of back dues that weren't mentioned in escrow. I checked the title paperwork, there's nothing owed." A man in a neon landscaping company hoodie leaned forward. "They did that to me too in 2021. They said I'd missed a groundskeeping fee for my side yard. I don't even have a side yard. It's a fence and a trash can." Around the room, heads nodded. A pattern was forming again, but this time, instead of whispers and frustration in driveways, people were speaking up. "I've got something that might help," I said, pulling a folder from my messenger bag. "It's a spreadsheet I compiled of known false charges and inconsistencies. If you've got paperwork that doesn't add up, we can plug it into this and track overlap," Kayla added. "We're also collecting data on who received fines and when. We're already seeing clusters certain weeks, certain addresses, especially those who didn't vote with the board." Jasmine narrowed her eyes. "So this was coordinated." A man I hadn't met, tall, sunburned, with a faint Midwestern accent, cleared his throat. "I think I have something that might prove it. I was the IT contractor who set up the HOA's internal file server. Nothing fancy, just a local backup with password protection. I kept a duplicate of the access logs. I'm not supposed to, but..." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a flash drive. "I checked after I heard about the investigation. There's a pattern of logins from Eleanor's address at odd hours, 2, 3 in the morning, accessing financial folders, editing file names, removing documents." Kayla blinked. "You still have the logs?" I brought them. I took the flash drive and plugged it into my laptop. It opened instantly, time-stamped entries, IP addresses, file changes. It was all there. Activity matching the periods when residents had reported sudden fines, unexplained assessments, or missing documents. We backed up the files to a second drive and handed it off to Tarek, the forensic accountant who had become a quiet fixture at these meetings. He said nothing as he took it, but his nod felt like a seal. The next morning, I got a call from Detective Voss again. "We've cross-referenced the server logs with the subpoenas we served on the HOA's bank records," she said. "There's a direct correlation between times Penwick accessed financial documents and outgoing payments to an unregistered shell company called Northedge Municipal Services." "Northedge?" I asked. "That name was on a few of my fines." "Exactly. It's not a real vendor. We traced the EIN. It's registered to a P.O. box tied to a real estate holding company. Guess who signed the incorporation paperwork? Eleanor. Bingo. The fraud ran deeper than we'd thought. Eleanor had fabricated a municipal services company, issued fake invoices for landscaping, community maintenance, and compliance inspections, then funneled HOA funds into it through false fines and assessments. From there, the money vanished into a tangle of shell accounts. She'd been draining the HOA budget for nearly 4 years. "I'm going to need you and Kayla to testify," Voss said. "Not just about the theft. We need your records, timelines, and your community's response. It shows pattern, motive, and impact. Testifying wasn't something I took lightly. But I'd gone this far. I wasn't going to stop because courtrooms made me uncomfortable. The trial was scheduled for March. It stretched 4 days. Eleanor showed up each day in a stiff gray blazer and a look that barely concealed her contempt. She refused to meet my eyes. When Kayla took the stand, she kept her voice steady, even when describing the intimidation tactics used against her. The evidence we'd collected was overwhelming. Between the surveillance logs, financial records, and the testimony of over 20 residents, there was no room for doubt. The prosecution closed by showing a screenshot of Eleanor's own email, requesting that the shell company issue 3 more invoices for Q3 to cover unexpected expenses. The subject line: "Let's keep it subtle." The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours, guilty on all counts. Wire fraud, criminal theft, operating a fraudulent enterprise, and unlawful surveillance. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman with no tolerance for excuses, sentenced her to 18 months in state prison, 5 years probation, and restitution to the Alderwood Creek community totaling over $160,000. Ronald Tellem took a plea deal. He received house arrest and a permanent ban from managing any fiduciary account tied to a homeowners association. He moved out quietly 2 weeks later. The restitution was processed through the county. A check arrived in my mailbox one afternoon, reimbursement for every fine I'd paid under Eleanor's tenure. I wasn't the only one. The entire neighborhood received compensation. Some got more than they expected. Others just enough to cover late fees and legal costs. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the line we drew. We didn't just remove Eleanor. We dismantled the system that let her operate unchecked. The oversight committee became permanent, with rotating membership, open ballots, and a rule that no one could serve more than 1 term without a 2-year break. The bylaws were rewritten. No more vague clauses. No more executive discretion. We brought in a municipal attorney to review every paragraph, and we posted the final version in a community binder outside the park entrance, public, permanent, and impossible to edit in secret. And the best part: we reallocated the HOA's remaining budget to something useful. A scholarship fund for local students, a new security system for the park, and a grant program for home repairs for low-income residents. On a warm spring afternoon, we held a block party to mark the first year without Eleanor's influence. There were food trucks, live music, and a raffle. Wesley won a new mountain bike. I grilled hot dogs next to the accountant who'd helped crack the case, and Tarek even laughed when someone joked about electing him mayor. Kayla stood near the garden beds, talking with Jasmine and a few others about starting a co-op for bulk home maintenance supplies. For the first time in years, the community didn't feel like a collection of isolated fences. It felt like a neighborhood again. And as I sat on my porch that evening, watching kids race their bikes down the sidewalk, I caught sight of the Ring cam's blinking light, still there, still watching. Not because we were afraid anymore, but because we'd learned the value of seeing things as they really are and never letting them slide.